In a tranquil part of the southwestern United States, there once lived a determined therapist who felt unexpectedly removed from any organized spiritual practice. This individual possessed a rich background in both psychology and nursing, which had led to an unusual combination of insights, blending emotional well-being with detailed knowledge of the human body. However, a chance decision to leave a beloved coastal city for a new job in a more conservative region set the stage for an intense inner struggle, a deeply unsettling medical crisis, and ultimately a fresh perspective on faith. Despite personal doubts about matters of belief, this mental health expert found a position in a local institution, specifically overseeing a psycho-oncology unit, a specialized arena designed to address the emotional and psychological impacts of cancer. Working closely with individuals and families grappling with severe health conditions, the therapist witnessed tremendous suffering that soon began to erode whatever remained of their spiritual certainty. Daily encounters on the pediatric floor, where young children faced excruciating medical regimens, exacerbated a growing skepticism about a compassionate higher power. Feelings of disconnect from a divine presence intensified until faith itself seemed like a distant memory. While neighborly communities in this conservative region seemed friendly, the professional appetite for practicing as a sex therapist met many obstacles. It was not just about finding clients in a small town. It was also about living in a place where open discussions of intimacy were often unwelcome. That sense of isolation pervaded both professional endeavors and personal spiritual life, sowing discontent. With a partner working at a major medical center and children in tow, life was full of responsibilities, obligations, and the sense of being caught between professional opportunities and emotional voids. One Saturday morning, traditionally a time for grocery runs or relaxed brunch preparations, turned out to be the catalyst for a life-altering event. In a spirit of self-improvement and an effort to stay physically fit, the therapist headed to a popular local gym, determined to push bodily limits through rigorous weight training. Determination to break personal strength records loomed large. If the legs could manage nearly all of the body's total mass, why should the arms not match that? With this determination burning, a chest press machine, loaded with a considerable weight, became the focal point. A sudden, sharp sting pierced through the back of the neck with an intensity that felt as if a blade had gone straight in. Disoriented and shaken, the therapist staggered away from the machine, unsure if the central nervous system had momentarily malfunctioned or if a catastrophic injury had occurred. Struggling to make sense of this sensation, they attempted to drink water but found that one side of the body started to shake uncontrollably. While anxiety flared, augmented by a pre-existing condition of elevated blood pressure that had only recently required medication. Alarmed by the paleness of the face and the uncontrollable tremors, a fellow gym-goer rushed to summon emergency services, setting into motion what would become a deeply transformative experience. As paramedics arrived, they gently placed the weakened body onto a stretcher, accompanied by an ever-growing sense of dread. The individual's spouse, having been equally ready for a relaxing day, was alerted of the predicament and hurried to the hospital. Relieved to be close by that weekend, every jolt of the ambulance caused excruciating pain, revealing a sensation so overwhelming that it seemed almost beyond human endurance. In that moment, an inward voice seemed to plead with a higher power, an intensely personal cry for mercy that transcended conventional thoughts about living or dying. This raw admission of desperation marked the first step in an unexpected spiritual metamorphosis. Emergency scans revealed a potentially lethal bleed in the brain. The local neurosurgeons were nearly all attending a conference, leaving only one retired expert available to assess the situation alongside a pediatric neuroradiologist. With limited resources on hand and the potential option of transferring to a better-equipped facility many miles away, the therapist and spouse faced a dilemma. A prior mutual agreement had stipulated nobody would be left alone in a life-threatening situation, so traveling separately seemed unthinkable. Hovering in a labyrinth of medical uncertainty, the therapist drifted in and out of consciousness. Yet, Alongside the flickers of fear, a profound calm emerged. This calm manifested from a genuine relinquishing of control, a willingness to let go of personal agendas and open up entirely to divine guidance. As the hours passed, specialized interventions kept vitals steady and stabilized the bleeding, granting more time than the doctors initially feared might be available. By the next day, widely recognized in certain faith traditions as a time of renewal, the patient gained a somewhat clearer sense of awareness, albeit still severely limited, that loved ones gathered, uncertain of what to expect. The atmosphere mixed celebration of a holy day with the anxiety of possible impending tragedy. Oddly enough, the therapist felt neither fully distressed nor exuberant, but instead inhabited a sphere of acceptance. An acceptance that recognized mortality as natural, even intimate. Meanwhile, a persistent headache and neck pain underscored the grim medical realities, but the longing to control events had vanished. Relatives noticed a pale or greenish tinge to the patient's complexion, yet every test uncovered new complexities within the skull. Excess fluid drained through tubes designed to reduce intracranial pressure, a routine but invasive way of managing bleeds in such delicate regions. Blood trickled from the ears and nose, clear signs that too much fluid was present within cranial boundaries. Despite being typically anxious and high energy, the therapist now existed in a state of forced stillness. The body, once used to energetic activities, could barely move. Abruptly, the medical team discovered that oxygen saturation had dropped dangerously, prompting a return to the intensive care unit. In that specialized setting, decisions about surgical interventions needed to be made swiftly. Several of the city's top neurosurgeons who had been out of town raced to return, concluding that the dissected artery, or the aneurysm causing the havoc, needed immediate attention. A coiling procedure might have been simpler, yet the extent of the bleed made full surgery the more prudent path. With the medication wearing off and the surgical staff preparing, the patient glimpsed a radiance, shimmering in an upper corner of the room. This was no standard hospital light or reflection off equipment. It possessed an otherworldly tint, gently beckoning. In the blur of activity, it became an unspoken question. Was it a mere hallucination, an effect of sedation, or a deeper sign? Even though medical professionals rushed about in controlled chaos, the therapist watched this illumination with curiosity and a blossoming sense of awe. Having spent years inside hospitals as both a nurse and a mental health professional, this observer was not prone to illusions. And yet, there it was, almost tunnel-like in shape but impossible to categorize. The luminous event hovered at the intersection of science and mystery. In the midst of this disorienting realm, a surge of memories flashed by. The move to this conservative town, the sense of alienation from worship communities, the profound cynicism about whether a benevolent presence could exist when innocent lives suffered needlessly. Each recollection played out like a film reel, culminating in a moment of wordless surrender. For the first time, the therapist understood the message that many cancer survivors had once shared, that truly relinquishing the desperate hold on life can bring an unexplainable peace. Outside the hospital window, the day might have been bright or dark. Nobody seemed entirely sure. Sleep and awareness blended. Then came the rapid sweep into surgery, the intangible glow still vaguely present in peripheral vision. The operating theater, built for scientific rigor, exuded a sterile hush. Surgeons in scrubs channeled all their expertise toward controlling the bleed and repairing the damaged vessels. Meanwhile, the patient, floating somewhere between sedation and awareness, sensed an odd combination of dread and trust. Swift, expert steps unfolded, but time felt elastic. It was surgery in the literal sense, yet it also served as a tapestry of intangible experiences. Those first hours after the operation proved precarious. Monitors documented each heartbeat and breath, while tubes and wires delivered medication and fluids. The staff's dedication was evident, though it was also overshadowed by an air of caution. A neurological bleed is never routine, and every second could change the outcome. In that environment, the recently distant sense of divinity seemed unexpectedly close. Uncertainty loomed large about whether consciousness would persist or whether personal identity would remain intact. The family, too, oscillated between hope and despair as they lingered in the antiseptic corridors. Eventually, the patient stabilized enough to receive short visits from loved ones. Each new face that appeared revealed a kind of gratitude for simply being able to speak, even if only in whispers. Tension lingered in every syllable, but there, too, was a quiet acceptance. Everything was as it needed to be. This acceptance was not a celebration, nor was it fatalistic. Rather, it was a profound state of reconciling with life's fragility. Moments that might have been overshadowed by fear in an earlier state of mind now felt like precious glimpses of normalcy. This entire saga shed light on lessons relevant to any personal journey of healing. There are how-to guides on managing crises, step-by-step approaches to spiritual exploration, and best practices for nurturing mental wellness in the face of the unknown. For any person grappling with a medical emergency, it is a behind-the-scenes process, often overlooked in a world that focuses on the quick fix or a viral hack. Yet, in that sterile hospital environment, every subtle shift in perspective suddenly mattered. The slow trek toward recovery involved advanced imaging, blood tests, consultation upon consultation, and unwavering support from family. Over time, the surplus fluid in the skull subsided, though the healing process needed extreme patience. This was not the place for easy methods or the latest trends in immediate gratification. Instead, the journey demanded incremental progress. An hour of improved vitals here, slightly better pain control there. Through it all, the therapist's inner transformation deepened. With each passing day, the medical team monitored the possibility of secondary complications. The mind, still grappling with the trauma, processed memories in fragments. At times, fleeting images of the luminous phenomenon would flash again. Between sedative-laced sleeps, the patient recalled the once distant posture toward organized religion. A surprising sense of calm now accompanied any reflections on that topic. Friends who visited commented on the patient's changed demeanor, remarking how an almost supernatural tranquility replaced the typically restless energy. New challenges also appeared. Navigating the complexities of bed rest can be unexpectedly difficult. People spend so much time trying to be productive that lying still without fuss can feel unnatural. Physical therapy sessions were introduced gently, focusing first on subtle movements, wiggling toes, then gently flexing fingers, slowly rotating the neck once the surgical site had stabilized. Drawing on a background in healthcare, the patient understood these therapies in a clinical sense, but now they held a deeper significance. Each minor step felt like a step back toward the world of the living. Meanwhile, the family juggled everyday demands such as children's activities, meal planning, and housekeeping, all while dealing with the emotional weight of nearly losing someone dear. A close circle of friends handled some of the logistical challenges, organizing meals and ensuring that the quieter tasks of daily grit, like laundry, did not fall by the wayside. Their kindness illuminated the sense of community that had once felt elusive in this conservative environment. That unexpected warmth contradicted the earlier perception that forging connections in this region would be tougher than in a bustling metropolis. As the patient's condition improved, deeper introspection took the spotlight. The tension between scientific skepticism and spiritual resonance no longer seemed irreconcilable. Cancer patients from the psycho-oncology unit had often spoken of revelations after experiencing mortal danger. They described moments of clarity that arrived when all illusions of control dissolved. This phenomenon appeared even more tangible now. Could a blend of medical mastery and divine rhythm shape a single life's trajectory? The convalescence extended for days, then weeks, and each stage revealed fresh considerations. In an era obsessed with top 10 strategies to expedite healing, the patient learned there was no quick path to mind-body unity after a crisis. The body's capacity for resilience is extraordinary, though it insists on natural pacing. Neurological injuries, in particular, require a type of patience that might baffle even the calmest souls. The hospital staff regularly came by to evaluate mental status, asking for simple orientation details, checking memory retention, and ensuring there was no massive shift in emotional stability. For the once restless professional, answering such simple questions felt humbling, an unspoken gratitude that those answers could still be given. Gradually, the day arrived when tubes and drains were removed. The breathing remained strong, scans seemed hopeful, and the neurosurgeons believed the bleed had been addressed. Though the risk of complications lingered, the patient was moved out of the main ward, signifying a milestone in the recovery process. Adjusting to the real world again, however, was not without challenges. Finding the balance between rest and activity, ensuring pain medication was taken as prescribed, and reintroducing slow, deliberate walks to regain stamina. Even minor tasks like strolling around the house or preparing a simple meal became meaningful achievements. That was the behind-the-scenes truth. Healing encompassed not only physical restoration, but also emotional recalibration. During this transitional period, reflections on the experience took on a new dimension. The trainer's echoing words at the gym seemed far in the past, yet the memory of falling to the floor and losing control of one side remained vivid. The fleeting thought of mortality merged with recollections of that mesmerizing glow in the corner of the ICU ceiling. Rather than an object of terror, that memory now summoned a gentle reverence. In a culture that often separates medical science and spirituality, this personal ordeal forged an unlikely bridge between the two realms. The spouse and children, witnessing the entire sequence of events, also felt transformations in their worldview. For them, the relief of having a loved one survive overshadowed older complaints about daily inconveniences. Over late-night coffees in the hospital lounge, the spouse had confronted unnerving possibilities: how to carry on if the worst scenario occurred, wondering if the vow never to allow each other to be alone in misery could be physically upheld. These reflections cultivated compassion and unity within the family unit, teaching them that the boundary separating normal life and catastrophe is startlingly thin. Tragedy can appear with no invitation, and sometimes only a specialized care team can stand between life and death. From a professional standpoint, the once distant question of how to effectively guide patients through their own medical tragedies found powerful validation in personal experience. Where the therapist once felt empathy, there was now an even keener understanding of the roller coaster of uncertainty. This experience birthed a tapestry of expert tips: the importance of acknowledging vulnerability, the significance of sharing burdens with loved ones, and the best practices to maintain mental resilience under acute stress. No matter how trained someone is, adversity spares no one from fear or despair. Yet adversity also offers perspective. Meanwhile, the topic of faith quietly resurfaced. Before this ordeal, the therapist was skeptical that a benevolent spiritual force could coexist with the intense suffering observed among cancer patients, particularly children, but the near-death experience had planted a seed of renewed openness. While it might not offer neat answers to cosmic mysteries, it allowed room for acceptance. That existence might involve deeper layers of meaning. The quiet moments in the ICU, the luminous presence, and the unscripted submission in the ambulance all contributed to a mosaic of a belief system that was neither strictly religious nor overtly secular. In time, new possibilities emerged. How to incorporate these insights back into daily life. From rethinking the role of spirituality in therapy to modifying personal routines, the metamorphosis demanded real-world adjustments. Perhaps the latest trends in mindfulness and meditation could benefit from the raw lessons learned in a hospital bed. A therapist considered weaving some of these revelations into practical guidelines for patients, an ultimate guide to bridging the gap between emotional anguish and the intangible comfort found in letting go. Clients facing chronic illnesses, especially, could learn from this direct example of stepping into the unknown, trusting in both medical expertise and personal faith, whether that faith is in a deity, in nature, or in the resilience of the human spirit. To sustain the improvements, regular medical checkups became the new normal. The concept of self-care, often overshadowed by a busy professional schedule, gained urgency. Under medical advice, gentle exercises replaced the rigorous bodybuilding that once fueled the therapist's ambition. Balancing rest with measured activity formed a step-by-step routine that recognized the body's new limits while aiming to gradually rebuild strength. Overreaching too soon could prove dangerous. The therapist realized that healing from such a traumatic event had no shortcuts. No viral hacks could magically dissolve the potential risk of another bleed. Despite the protective approach, moments of frustration naturally surfaced. Each wave of fatigue or spell of dizziness served as a reminder that full recovery is an ongoing process. Yet with each passing day, the person who had once wanted to leave this conservative town behind began to see it in a new light. Nurses, hospital cleaners, administrative staff, and acquaintances from the community emerged to offer words of encouragement or share small tokens of support. Individuals who previously felt like strangers were now rallying around to help provide stability and reassurance. Eventually, the emotional fortitude gained from the incident took shape in new professional endeavors. The psycho-oncology patients, many in the throes of their own battles, found solace in hearing about this brush with mortality. While it was not a scenario any practitioner deliberately brings upon themselves, it enabled a more genuine connection. Cancer survivors and their families resonated with the shared vulnerability, the sense that the concept of a higher power could be multifaceted. Kindness, love, hope carried weight in therapy sessions. Another personal evolution involved reevaluating boundaries. Before the hemorrhage, the therapist approached life with a kind of rigorous drive, always focused on achievements and ambitions. But post-crisis, the counselor began to encourage more reflective practices. Rather than championing constant busyness, they explored the idea of sustainable balance. Whether those new methods would become trending now in mental health discussions remained unknown, but they offered a sense of direction that aligned with the awakened perspective. Reflecting on the vivid recollections of that mysterious light, the therapist found it took on nuanced meaning. Was it a sign from a realm beyond conventional perception? Or was it the mind's adaptive coping mechanism in a dire situation? Perhaps it was both. The experience was so personal that logical categorization seemed inadequate. As time went on, the memory no longer caused confusion, but instead served as a comforting symbol, an emblem of hope in places where reason alone might come up short. In the final phases of recovery, the individual who once harbored animosity toward a perceived distant creator felt something akin to tenderness. It did not erase past tragedies. The children on the pediatric unit still faced grueling therapies, and some would not survive. Suffering continued to exist in the world. Yet what changed was the realization that the presence of hardship does not necessarily negate the possibility of divine love or intangible benevolence. The paradox, while still unresolved, no longer seemed hollow. Upon being discharged from strict medical supervision, the therapist stepped into a mild, early morning breeze outside the hospital. Simple acts like feeling the wind or hearing nearby traffic took on a renewed significance. Those small experiences reminded everyone present how fleeting existence can be, and how profound it is to move from a state of near death to incremental steps toward normality. The receding possibility of a second hemorrhage offered an enormous sense of freedom. However, the memory of that brush with mortality served as an invisible bookmark in personal history. Close friends recall how, in the months that followed, the therapist introduced a more holistic approach in therapy sessions. Where once the focus might have skewed toward purely clinical methods, it now included the experiential dimension of letting go, trusting life's flow, and cultivating heightened awareness. No single step-by-step tutorial can fully encapsulate the intangible transformations that accompany a near-fatal ordeal, but the newly developed approach offered a fresh perspective on the synergy between the human psyche and the unknown. Over time, the question of moving away from this conservative region arose again. The spouse had opportunities in larger cities with more advanced resources, and the thought of returning to a beloved urban center enticed the entire family. This time, though, the reluctance to remain was tinged with nostalgia. The place that once felt suffocating was also where life's most pivotal turn had occurred. The supportive community and the heroic medical staff had become woven into personal identity. Ultimately, the family did decide to relocate, but they carried away the lessons gleaned from this extraordinary episode. The final departure was less a frantic escape and more a natural progression into the next chapter. Looking back, the therapist often recounted that fleeting moment in the ambulance, when the pain was so severe that it felt as though the mind might fracture. The heartfelt plea made during that treacherous journey, a plea that surrendered any grasp on outcomes, proved transformative. Embracing that intangible calm became the hidden treasure. Paradoxically, the worst physical agony birthed a gateway to profound spiritual alignment. One might say it was a demonstration of the best practices for confronting the unknown. Find humility in the midst of crisis, cultivate readiness for any outcome, and trust that some deeper current might carry you home. From a professional vantage point, these insights became an ever-expanding framework for guiding others through crisis. In the psycho-oncology setting, where mortality often highlights every weakness, real empathy can be priceless. Sharing the personal story of surviving a hemorrhage, though it lacks the outward glamour that top 10 strategies or ultimate guide videos might claim, can reach souls in ways that generic advice cannot. People facing terminal diagnoses or caring for those who do often feel they are adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Hearing that a once skeptical mind found solace in surrender can be transformative. That new vantage point also colored attitudes toward the subject of sex therapy, which initially felt unwelcome in the conservative community. Rather than focusing on obstacles to open discussions, the therapist recognized the importance of gentle dialogue about intimacy, since medical treatments, especially those involving cancer or severe illness, often disrupt personal relationships. The notion of bridging emotional wellness with physical realities took on greater primacy, reminding all involved that holistic well-being includes mind, body, and spirit. Of course, a near-death experience did not instantly turn everyday life into a fairy tale. Challenges continued to surface. Bills required payment, family conflicts still arose, and some days brought a sense of discouragement. But at times, a flash of memory from the hospital, where monitors beeped ominously and tubes drained away excess fluid from the skull, served as a reminder that everyday stressors pale in comparison to the boundary between existence and non-existence. In subsequent years, the therapist began to offer talks on resilience, addressing students, healthcare workers, and community groups who were curious about the intersection of mental health, severe illness, and spiritual insight. These sessions sometimes blended the art of storytelling with practical takeaways. How-to resilience tutorials might include acknowledging fear, practicing self-compassion, and allowing support from others. Expert tips encouraged daily reflection on gratitude, while step-by-step methods urged individuals to label and process their emotions rather than bury them. The therapist's partner, too, carried an evolved outlook into the next phase of their medical career. They had witnessed the fragility of life in a stark and personal way, which no textbook or professional training could replicate. They often recounted that they had watched the person they loved slip perilously close to an irreversible edge, only for a combination of medical science and transcendent grace to guide them back. This changed the way the partner interacted with patients, infusing hope into clinical practice in subtle but significant ways. Eventually, the couple's children, who had been rattled by the possibility of losing a parent, emerged with a strong sense of maturity. Though it was a painful experience, they understood more about empathy and the necessity of a reliable support network. They recognized that the monotony of day-to-day existence can be shattered in an instant, an evolving realization that led them to be more patient with each other, more forgiving of imperfections, and quicker to salve family rifts. In many ways, the entire family's trajectory was permanently altered by that fateful day at the gym. The story began with a desire to push physical strength to reflect control over the body, then collided tragically but also miraculously with the random fragility of human life. For years to come, they would speak of that moment as an unplanned turning point, an event that tested relationships, confronted personal biases, and ultimately nurtured an enduring sense of reverence. In sum, this journey underscores a compelling truth. Adversity spares no one, yet the ways we respond can unlock discoveries about ourselves and our place in the world. Whether someone faces a burst blood vessel, a cancer diagnosis, a spiritual crisis, or even the day-to-day demands of life, there is much to learn from experiences of surrender, acceptance, and resilience. By weaving together medical intervention, emotional support, and a mysterious brush with an indescribable radiance, this story provides a layered exploration of how trauma can guide us toward deeper understanding. For anyone who finds themselves questioning faith or feeling estranged from any notion of divine love, this narrative offers a spark of possibility. It does not guarantee simple answers. It does not promise that tragedy will bypass anyone who believes ardently enough in a higher being. Instead, it illuminates that within the crucible of suffering, a gentle flame of insight can arise like a hidden gem. Hard-won wisdom emerges in the face of pain, forging connections that may otherwise remain dormant. Moreover, for all who hold a professional role in health or counseling, this account highlights the potency of personal experience as a teaching tool. While textbooks and research remain vital, there is a vulnerability inherent in truly knowing how it feels to lose control, to relinquish that fierce grip on life's steering wheel, and in that fleeting moment of submission, the seeds of empathy are watered, giving rise to empathy that resonates powerfully with those who suffer. Some might call this near-death experience a blessing in disguise, though that terminology can sound paradoxical. The impetus for such a blessing was unimaginable dread, staggering physical pain, and a brush with the limits of mortality. Yet blessings might not always wear the cloak of comfort. They sometimes break us open, pushing emotional boundaries and forcing us to examine the truths that lie beneath the surface. In many retellings, the moment of encountering an ethereal light has become a potent focal point, especially for those intrigued by spiritual phenomena. Whether it was an angelic presence, a trick of perception, or the manifestation of a longing for solace, the effect was undeniably life-altering. The path forward blended belief with pragmatism, melding the advanced knowledge of neurosurgery with the intangible realm of faith. In the final analysis, that synergy between mind, body, and soul may represent the real behind-the-scenes essence of healing. That brings us to our broad question: can healing heal? In reflecting on this chapter of life, the therapist continues to respect and champion the synergy of medical intervention and personal surrender. While intangible, that quiet acceptance played as crucial a role in the process as any specialized diagnostic test or advanced surgical tool. Each visitor who stepped into that hospital room might have carried a unique worldview, be it purely scientific or devoutly religious, yet the shared goal was one of restoration, repairing a broken vessel so it could sustain life's daily wonders. The final ripple of meaning radiates outward. Friends, colleagues, patients, and strangers who hear this saga can find their own parallels. Maybe they have encountered a moment when everything precious seemed threatened, or maybe they carry silent doubts about the existence of a benevolent force amid a harsh world. In hearing about the therapist's experiences, many realize that personal transformation can stem from uninvited adversity. Long-held convictions can shift, replaced by a deeper, more inclusive understanding that fear and love can coexist. Above all, this entire journey highlights that love from a partner who refused to abandon promises, from children who waited in anxious hope, from the retired neurosurgeon who stepped in, from the nurses who monitored vitals in the darkest hours. reflects a force that transcends ordinary explanations. The solace found in such love, whether or not one assigns it a divine label, represents a beacon that can guide us through the bleakest storms. This story, told without direct quotations but bound together by truths gleaned from the experience, stands as testimony to the delicate interplay between despair and hope, doubt and faith, isolation and community. It reminds us that our most significant revelations often arrive in the bleakest moments, that adversity can carve a sacred space for epiphanies. In the end, life's greatest gifts might stem from what initially appears to be our darkest time, pushing us to discover new layers of inner strength and compassion that we never knew we possessed.